Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Noelle, and today I really didn't have anything in mind to talk about initially, and then I happened across a news article about a bike race that was held in Rizal province across a few towns, and apparently one of the towns had not given clearance to the bike race organizers. They didn't actually have the start or finish of the race in that town, but a lot of the cyclists and a record number of bystanders and onlookers were around, which broke a lot of the health protocols that we have here in the Philippines for mass gatherings. And basically it got on the nerves of a lot of the residents of that particular town, and so now the town is looking to pursue legal action against the race organizers. So this is even though I wasn't there personally, it's a huge blow to the cycling community here in the Philippines, because you know, they were already told not to do a certain thing, but they did it anyway, or they weren't able to do crowd control, so it just looks bad. And so I decided to talk about one question, which is, should I sign up for a race in 2021? So yeah, for many of us, our first touch point into endurance sport was the races, our participation in them, that feeling of crossing a finish line, getting your medal and your finisher towel and all that. And so yeah, 2020 was very disconcerting for many of us who are age groupers in the sport. It was also really distressing for the pros in particular, because that's how they made their living. I'm talking just about the age group experience, because we do not need to race for a living, and this is all about the consumer end of the entire race experience, because I know that race directors and race organizers all suffered a huge blow to their livelihoods in the past year. Some of them have pivoted into virtual racing, and that's great, but then there are the other people that they used to hire, the suppliers, I know the marshals could be volunteers, but some of them are also like hired staff of the race organizers. So yeah, the entire race industry has been impacted, but I want to talk about this from the participant side of things and what you should be considering when you're thinking about signing up for a race. Now, of course, this is all Philippine specific. Galing nga naman po ako sa Pilipinas, dito po ako nakatira. I do have many of my videos in English, but I always speak in terms of how things apply to me in my situation. And my primary audience really for this particular video is for those of us who live here in the Philippines, who have to operate in this situation. Now, other countries are in different situations, and you know, there are countries who are holding races already, and that's great. It's because either they have their COVID situation under control, or they have a robust healthcare system and they're very confident in that healthcare system. And then of course there are those places that just don't care, and I'm talking about Florida, who basically, they joked late last year that if Tokyo were unable to hold the Olympic Games, then they would be more than willing for the Olympic Games to be moved to Florida, which is like the #1 in terms of infections and deaths in the US. It's off the top of my head, I might be wrong in some facts there, but basically, yeah, there are places that don't care. They continue to conduct business as usual and hold events as usual. And it's really up to you if you want to stay safe in those places. But this video is about the Philippine situation. Although the detected infections have gone down from a peak of, what was the peak? Like 6,000 a day. And now we're just below 2,000, I think, at this point. Contact tracing isn't doing great. Mandatory quarantining if you're found to be infected. The facilities are patchwork, so some local government units will have better quarantine facilities and funding to isolate the people who are sick from the people who are not. Some other local governments don't have the same capacity, so yeah, we're not handling it as well as we should be. And then, trying to reopen business around that leaves the responsibility of staying healthy entirely up to, instead of actually really looking out for the people under their care. There is a major race that's scheduled to happen in June, somewhere up north. Just because a race has opened up for registration doesn't necessarily mean that you should go and register for it. So before you do register for something, I have 4 considerations. And these are all just off the top of my head. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them, but they're all off the top of my head. And if you have other considerations you think people need to take into account when deciding whether or not to sign up for a race, then please do leave them in the comments below so that people can see it. So consideration number 1 is the infection rate in your locale and in the race venue. That's because you have to consider the likelihood of you, the participant, being a vector, somebody who brings the infection to the race venue. You also have to consider the likelihood of you, the participant, getting infected at the race venue. So, for instance, if there was a race that was happening in a place in the country that had no community transmission of COVID, okay? So, yeah, because they feel safe there, they've opened up registrations there. But I am coming from Metro Manila, which it's not the top producing place in the Philippines anymore when it comes to COVID infections, but still, it's still a pretty high risk place to be. And so I wouldn't want to risk taking the virus over to that community that has no community transmission. So yeah, I should not sign up for a race in that place. But if you lived in that community which has no community transmission of the virus, then go ahead and sign up for it and support your local race director. Consideration number 2. Can I afford the cancellation or postponement of the race? Now, that race I mentioned earlier, the one that's happening in June, it's a significant outlay of funds just for the registration itself, okay? And then you have to book your accommodation. I'm not sure, but in that location, they might not be asking for RT-PCR tests to prove that you're not actively infectious when you come there. But, things could change and they might require it. So you have to factor in the cost of that RT-PCR test into your overall budget for the race. The third thing that you might be spending on is transport, especially if you're flying in from somewhere else. Now, the race that I mentioned is only for people who reside in the Philippines and for Filipino citizens. But you're still going to see people fly in from other places in the Philippines, or other Filipino citizens fly home to do this race. So yeah, that's plane ticket. They also require RT-PCR for the plane tickets and other sorts of transactions. So, what if the organizer says, we're sorry, the local government has informed us we cannot hold this race at the agreed upon date. We're postponing it, or if it's too close to the race date, sometimes the major organization, that the umbrella organization of these races, says it's canceled. So it's as good as raced, but you don't get to race it. Can you afford to lose all that money? Because nobody's giving refunds at this point. Well, you know, airlines do have refund policies at this point. You can actually rebook. I think you can rebook unlimited with some airlines. But in any case, there are so many things that you cannot refund when it comes to racing outside your own locale. So yeah, can you afford to lose that money? If you can, then go right ahead and sign up for it. But wait for this next consideration. What are the health protocols in effect for that race? A cycling time trial race that was postponed from the start of this month to March, and that's because the local government decided to implement stricter health protocols. Like, for instance, they need an antigen test, not an RT-PCR test, an antigen test the day before the race so that you are cleared to race. And also, I think you had to do a voluntary quarantine before the race. I didn't really look into the nitty-gritty of those things, but yeah, so they're trying to implement some health protocols to number one, minimize the number of people who might be infected going into the community to do that event, and number two, give you confidence that you're not going to be among people who might be infective. Now, it's up to you to decide if this makes you feel confident enough to hang out with people who aren't from within your own social bubble. For instance, I only hang out with people from my own household. That's the way it's been. I haven't had coffee or a meal with a friend in a long time. So I personally wouldn't feel comfortable being in a crowded situation with other people I don't know the health histories to, even if they've taken antigen tests. And that's because that's me. I don't have enough confidence in those measures. Now, if you do have confidence in those measures, in those health protocols, then go ahead and sign up for it. But here is my last consideration. Is it really essential for you to race? I mentioned at the start of this video that many of us got into the sport just because of the competition, just because of the racing. But truth be told, you can swim, bike, and run without needing to race. I have this uncle who probably runs like a half marathon distance every other day, and he doesn't feel the need to go out and do a race to validate himself, because what he enjoys is the running and the health benefits that he derives from the running. And so, yeah, is racing essential to your experience of the sport? For me, I've had a lot of time to think about that, because I've had many times during this entire journey, this fitness journey, where I haven't been able to race because of health issues. I had to find meaning in other things in the sport. So the basic, that the sensation of running, I find joy in that. The sensation of sweating, the sensation of going fast or taking it slow, that sort of thing. And I have found that for me, it is not essential to race. If it's really essential to your mental health to have this outlet to race, then yeah, go ahead and sign up for that race. I hope you race safely. You will always have opportunity to race. This is certainly an unprecedented time for all of us, but it just needs a little patience before we can get to the time when we can once again race. And if you can find it within yourself to stay patient and wait for that time, I will be there on the starting line with you when it's finally safe to race again. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening to me rant about this. If you found this particular video informative, illuminating, or if you have, strong reactions for it or against it, please do let me know. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and please subscribe so that you can see our next video. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again next time.